I'm 24, male, working as a social worker at a family crisis center. I used to believe family was forever. That blood was thicker than water, and that the bonds formed between a father and his children were unbreakable. 4 years ago, I learned how quickly those bonds can dissolve. Dad was everything to me. Every Little League game, every science fair, every late night when I needed help with calculus homework, he was there. My pride, he'd call me, his hand firm on my shoulder, eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. Those words meant everything to a kid trying to figure out his place in the world. I remember how he'd teach me to change the oil in his old Ford F-150, patiently explaining each step as I handed him tools. "Pay attention now," he'd say. "Someday this truck might be yours." His voice would get that playful edge, the one that made me feel like we shared something special, something just between us. My sister Julia never quite had that connection with him. She was 3 years younger, more interested in her books and art projects than Dad's mechanical lessons. But he tried with her too. Attended every dance recital, built her the bookshelf that still stands in her room, taught her how to throw a punch just in case. He loved us both fiercely, but everyone knew I was Dad's favorite. Mom was different, distracted. Sometimes I'd catch her staring out windows, a faraway look in her eyes like she was searching for something beyond our suburban life. She loved us, I think, but there was always something restless about her. When they fought, which wasn't often but loud when it happened, she'd bring up dreams she'd abandoned, opportunities lost when she became a mother at 23. "We all make sacrifices, Caroline," Dad would say, his voice tight. "That's what family does." I never imagined those words would come back to haunt us all. The DNA test kits arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because I just aced my history final and was planning to ask Dad if I could borrow the truck that weekend for a camping trip with friends. "What are these for?" Julia asked, poking at the boxes on the kitchen counter. Dad's voice was unnaturally calm. "Just something I'd like us to do as a family." Mom froze by the refrigerator, a half-empty glass of wine in her hand. Her knuckles whitened around the stem. "Is everything okay?" I asked, sensing the tension crackling between them. "Everything's fine," Dad said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just curious about our heritage. Thought it might be interesting." Mom set her glass down too hard, wine sloshing over the rim. "Mark, can we talk about this in private?" They disappeared into their bedroom. The shouting started 10 minutes later. I didn't understand then what was happening. Julia and I exchanged confused glances over the dinner we ended up making ourselves when neither parent emerged to cook. We swabbed our cheeks the next morning, Dad watching with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Mom wasn't there. She'd left early for work, something she rarely did. 3 weeks later, everything fell apart. "You need to see this." Dad's voice was hollow as he called me into his study. Julia was already there, perched on the edge of a chair, eyes red and swollen. The computer screen showed results I couldn't immediately comprehend. Colored bars, percentages, and a clear statement. 0% probability of paternal relationship. "What does this mean?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "It means I'm not your biological father." Each word seemed to cost him physical pain. "Neither you nor Julia." The world tilted beneath me. "That's impossible. The test must be wrong." "I had them run it twice," he said. His hands trembled slightly as he closed the laptop. "I've suspected for years. Comments from old friends, the timing never quite adding up. But I never wanted to believe it." "Dad, this doesn't change anything," I said desperately. "You raised us. You are our father." He looked at me then, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the man who had taught me to throw a baseball, who had stayed up all night helping me finish my science project, who had called me his pride. Then his eyes hardened. "Your mother has been living a lie our entire marriage, and she's made me live one too." He stood, turning away from us. "I need some time." He moved out that weekend. Packed 2 suitcases while Mom locked herself in the bathroom sobbing. Julia clung to him, begging him not to go. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what was happening. "Will you be back?" I managed to ask as he loaded his bags into the truck, the same truck he'd promised might be mine someday. He hesitated, one hand on the driver's door. "I don't know, son." A pause, then a correction that cut like a knife. "I don't know, Alex." Not my pride. Not even my name spoken with warmth. Just Alex, a stranger's name on his lips. I watched the taillights of his truck disappear down our street, unaware that it would be the last time I would see him for 4 years. Life after Dad left was unrecognizable. Mom alternated between hysterical denial and cold detachment. Some nights she'd sob about how much she had loved him, how she had made one mistake early in their marriage. Other times, she'd laugh bitterly about being finally free from his suffocating expectations. I tried to understand, to find some explanation that would make sense of our shattered family. But the truth was ugly and simple. Mom had cheated, possibly multiple times, and Julia and I were the living proof of her infidelity. "Who is my real father?" I asked her once, when she was sober enough to have a conversation. She shrugged, refilling her wine glass. "Could be any number of people, honestly. I was young, I was restless." She eyed me critically. "You have Kevin's jawline. Or maybe it was Sean. He had your eyes." I never asked again. School became my refuge. I buried myself in AP classes, taking extra credits, anything to stay away from home. Julia withdrew into herself, her grades plummeting as she spent more time with a crowd I didn't recognize, coming home with red-rimmed eyes and the sickly sweet smell of marijuana clinging to her clothes. Mom started dating again, though that seemed a generous term for the parade of men who sometimes stayed the night or lingered over coffee in the mornings. Our house, once filled with the scent of Dad's Sunday pancakes and the sound of his off-key singing, now felt like a way station for strangers. I graduated high school without Dad in the audience, got accepted to state on a partial scholarship, moved into the dorms and rarely came home even during breaks. I worked double shifts at the campus cafeteria to avoid taking money from Mom, who had started calling herself Caroline again instead of Mrs. Henderson. I never stopped using Dad's last name, though. Henderson. It was mine. It was who I was, regardless of DNA. "Alex, he's coming over today." Mom's voice on the phone was tense. "He wants to talk about legal matters." 4 years. 4 years without a call, a text, an email. 4 birthdays, 4 Christmases, 4 Father's Days where I stared at my phone, willing it to ring with his number. "Dad's coming? When?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "This afternoon. And don't call him that. He's not your father, remember? He made that perfectly clear when he abandoned us." When he abandoned us? Not when I destroyed our family with my lies. Mom had always been skilled at revising history to cast herself as the victim. "I'll be there," I said, already grabbing my keys. Julia met me on the porch, cigarette dangling from her fingers. At 20, she looked older than her years. Dark circles under her eyes, hair chopped into an uneven bob she must have cut herself. "The prodigal father returns," she said with a mirthless laugh. "This should be fun." But there was hope in her eyes, too. The same desperate hope I felt, that somehow, after all this time, he might have forgiven us for a sin that wasn't ours to begin with. Dad, no, Mark Henderson, arrived at precisely 3 p.m., punctual as always. He looked older, gray threading through his dark hair, new lines etched around his mouth. He wore a suit I didn't recognize, his shoulders stiff as he approached the house he had once called home. For a brief, beautiful moment when our eyes met, I thought I saw a flicker of the warmth I remembered. My heart leapt. Maybe he had missed us too. Maybe time had softened his anger. Then his gaze hardened, and he nodded curtly. "Alex? Julia? Is your mother home?" Not kids, or even our names spoken with any affection. Just a cold acknowledgement of our existence. Inside, we sat in the living room that still held ghosts of our former life. The recliner where Dad used to read the Sunday paper. The mantel with spaces where family photos had once stood before. Mom took them down in a fit of rage. "I'll get right to the point," he said, placing a folder on the coffee table. "I'm remarrying in December. Sharon and I want a clean slate. Part of that is resolving some outstanding legal matters. Mom's laughter cut through the room, high-pitched and brittle. Oh, how wonderful for you and Sharon. What is she? 12? She's 34, Caroline. And unlike you, she values honesty in relationships. So what's this about then? Julia asked, her voice small despite her attempt at bravado. He didn't look at her when he responded. I want you both to stop using my last name. I've spoken with my attorney, and since neither of you are biologically mine, there's no legal reason for you to continue carrying the Henderson name. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. You want us to change our names? It's not appropriate, he said stiffly. You aren't Hendersons. We've been Hendersons our entire lives, I argued, my voice rising. You raised us as Hendersons. He finally looked at me then, his eyes cold. That was before I knew the truth, before I knew you were a bastard, the son of a whore who made a fool of me for 20 years. The words hung in the air, poisonous and irretrievable. Mom laughed again, that same unhinged sound that had become her signature in recent years. Well, well, the mask finally slips. Tell me, Mark, does Sharon know what a vindictive ass you really are? I couldn't breathe. The man sitting across from me, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cried at my kindergarten graduation, who had called me his pride, was unrecognizable. In his place sat a stranger consumed by bitterness, striking out at the easiest targets for his pain. Julia was crying silently, tears tracking down her cheeks. I stood up, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. We'll consider your request, I said formally. But until then, I remain Alex Henderson. That's who I am. That's who you've pretended to be, he corrected. But lies have a way of revealing themselves eventually. I learned that the hard way. He left shortly after, the folder of legal papers untouched on the table. The sound of his car starting in the driveway felt like a period at the end of a sentence I didn't want to finish. Mom poured herself another drink. Well, that was delightful. Anyone for dinner? I'm thinking takeout. Julia fled to her room, slamming the door. I stood frozen, trying to reconcile the father of my memories with the man who had just called me a bastard to my face. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, turning over the fragments of our broken family in my mind. The father who wasn't my father biologically, but had been my father in every way that mattered, until he wasn't. The mother whose lies had unraveled everything, who now laughed instead of taking responsibility. The life I'd been building for myself at college, separate from all of this dysfunction. And underneath it all, a question that had been growing since the DNA results came back 4 years ago. Who was I really? If not Mark Henderson's son, then whose? The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't control who had contributed to my DNA, but I could control what I did with the life I had. I wouldn't let someone else's lies or someone else's bitterness define me. I returned to school, doubled down on my studies, changed my major to social work, wanting to help families navigate crises like the one that had shattered mine. Took on extra loans when my scholarship didn't cover everything. Graduated a semester early with honors. I stayed in touch with Julia, watching with relief as she pulled herself out of her downward spiral, got her GED, started community college classes. We rarely spoke about that day with Dad, with Mark, but the memory of it fueled us both in different ways. Mom eventually moved to Florida with a man she'd met online. She calls occasionally, usually when she's been drinking, to reminisce about the good old days that never really existed the way she remembers them. I kept the Henderson name, not out of spite, but because it was mine. I had earned it through 20 years of being raised as Alex Henderson. DNA couldn't take that away from me. 3 months ago, I received a letter from a law firm. Mark Henderson had died suddenly. Heart attack at 53. Sharon, his new wife of less than 3 years, had found my address among his things. The letter contained a note, written in his familiar handwriting. Alex, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I've had time to think about many things since that day at the house. Anger is a poison that consumes the vessel that holds it. I held on to mine too long. You were my son in every way that matters. Biology gave you life, but I gave you your values, your work ethic, your terrible taste in baseball teams. I see that now. I've amended my will. The house in Vermont and the trust fund are yours. Use them well. I was wrong that day. You are a Henderson. You always were. Dad Sharon called a week later, explaining through tears that he had been planning to reach out to make amends, that he had kept newspaper clippings of my college graduation announcement, that he had never stopped loving me, even when rage and betrayal had clouded his judgment. The inheritance was substantial, enough to pay off my student loans, to help Julia finish school, to put a down payment on a small house near the clinic where I now work. I was sorting through some of his personal effects last week when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number, but I answered anyway. Alex? Alex Henderson? A woman's voice, somehow familiar though I couldn't place it. Yes, this is Alex. It's Jennifer. Jennifer Marks? We dated senior year of high school? I remembered her. Curly brown hair, quick laugh, transferred to another school before graduation. Jennifer, hi. It's been a while. I heard about your dad, she said softly. And then I saw on Facebook about your inheritance. That's quite a windfall. Something in her tone made me pause. News travels fast. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, she continued, her voice taking on a warmth that hadn't been there at the start of the call. I always regretted how things ended between us. Maybe we could get coffee sometime. Catch up? The pieces clicked together. Jennifer, who had dumped me shortly after Dad left, saying she couldn't handle the drama of my family situation. Jennifer, who had blocked me on social media when I tried to stay friends. Jennifer, who had started dating the captain of the lacrosse team a week after we broke up. How did you hear about the inheritance? I asked, my voice neutral. She laughed, a tinkling sound that once made my teenage heart race. Oh, you know how it is in this town. People talk. So, coffee? Or maybe dinner? I'm free Friday. 4 years ago, I might have jumped at the chance. 4 years ago, I was still the boy desperately seeking approval, mistaking attention for affection. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I appreciate the thought, Jennifer, but I'm not interested in catching up. Oh, a beat of silence. Is there someone else? I thought about the life I was building, the career helping others navigate family trauma, the small house that would soon be mine, the relationship I was developing with Sharon, who had loved my father and who was unexpectedly becoming a friend to both me and Julia. No, I said honestly. There's no one else. I'm just not the same person I was, and I'm not looking to revisit the past. But I could hear the calculation in her voice. I thought we had something special back then. We were teenagers, I said gently. And you left when things got difficult. I don't blame you for that. It was a lot to handle. But I'm not interested in people who only want to be in my life when it's convenient or beneficial for them. The silence stretched between us. This is about the money, isn't it? She finally asked, her tone hardening. You think I'm only calling because you're rich now? Are you saying that's not why you called? Another pause. You've changed, Alex. Yes, I agreed. I have. After we hung up, I sat looking at Dad's old watch that Sharon had given me from his things. The crystal was scratched, the leather band worn. He'd never replaced it, even when he could afford better. He used to say it reminded him of where he came from, that some things weren't meant to be discarded just because they showed signs of wear. I thought about how people come into our lives for different reasons. Some stay, some leave. Some return when they think there's something to gain. The trick is recognizing who belongs in which category. Dad had made his mistakes. So had Mom. So had I. But in the end, what defined us wasn't the errors we made, but how we chose to learn from them. I slipped the watch onto my wrist, a perfect fit, as though it had been waiting for me all along. My name is Alex Henderson, not because of DNA or legal documents, but because that's who I chose to be. That's who I earned the right to be, through all the broken pieces that eventually formed something stronger at the fracture points. And that, I've discovered, is enough.